This is Gen Z, a podcast that explores Generation Z, who they are, how they're different from other generations, while also being an incredible blend of those who came before them. We explore what they think is cool, what moves them, and why they do what they do. I'm your host, Meghan Grace. Welcome back. It is always wonderful to spend time like this. As someone who's spent years in leadership education and organizational development, I've seen how our understanding of what it means to lead has been shifting, and how it has to continue evolving alongside the world around us. Leadership doesn't live in a vacuum. It's shaped by culture, by values, and by what society demands from those in charge. Today's leaders aren't just expected to hit performance metrics or hold titles. They're navigating a world where every decision, every word, and every action can be seen, shared, and scrutinized in real time. We're living in an era where leadership is less about authority and more about accountability, and younger generations are stepping into that space with a different lens. Leadership research from places like Harvard Business Review and McKinsey have shown us that leaders from younger generations are prioritizing transparency, mental well-being, and purpose more than previous generations. Our guest in today's episode is here to help us understand why that's not just a trend, but it's a transformation. I'm thrilled to welcome my friend Amanda Litman, a political strategist, author, and co-founder of Run for Something, a game-changing organization that's helped over 1,500 young, diverse candidates run for and win local office. Her latest book, When We're in Charge, is a powerful guide for Millennial and Gen Z leaders who are redefining what it means to lead with intention, equity, and yes, boundaries. We're going to dig into what authentic leadership really looks like today, why Gen Z's audacity is a feature, not a flaw, and how we can all lead better by unlearning outdated playbooks. So let's get into it.
Have you ever been to a webinar where the topic was great, but there wasn't enough time to ask questions or have a dialogue to learn more? Well, welcome to HR and Payroll 2.0, the podcast where those post-webinar questions become episodes. We feature HR practitioners, leaders, and founders of HR, payroll, and workplace innovation and transformation, sharing their insights and lessons learned from the trenches. We dig in to share the knowledge and tips that can help modern HR and payroll leaders navigate the challenges and opportunities ahead. So join us.
I, as usual, am very excited about today's guest. However, I love this guest because it's a friend of a friend. And we were able to get connected about a year ago when Amanda was in the process of writing her new book, which she's going to tell you all about. But Amanda is an absolute dynamo in the space of inspiring new leaders and engaging new leaders. So as someone that loves to nerd out about leadership, Amanda, welcome. I'm so excited for this formal friendship nerd out space. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I am pumped to be here.
It's the best. And Amanda has an amazing new book, When We're in Charge, which does focus on Gen Z and millennial leadership. We're going to talk a lot about that. But before we get to brag on your book, let's talk a bit about who you are, Amanda. You've got such a fascinating story. Give us a little bit of that. I know you could probably give us a whole slew of stories, but tell us a little bit about who you are and the journey that you've taken to getting here today.
So I'm born and raised in Northern Virginia. Went to Northwestern for college where I studied American Studies, focusing specifically on women in politics. My senior year of college, I got an internship on the Obama re-elect campaign in Chicago. I was an email writer, so sending emails being like, hey, want to give money to this campaign? I was hired before I graduated, took a day off for graduation, worked through that election, which we won. So fun, love to win. Stayed in Chicago to work for Organizing for Action, which was the president's nonprofit helping people organize around his agenda. Moved to Florida in 2014 to work on the governor's race then moved to New York, where I now live, to work for Secretary Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign starting in 2015. I was her email director, so helping raise money for the campaign and recruit volunteers. And we lost, which sucked. And about a week after Election Day, I started hearing from people I'd gone to high school and college with. Hey, Amanda, I'm a public school teacher in Chicago. I'm thinking about running for office. What do I do? You're the only person I know in politics. Tell me where to go. And I didn't have an answer for them because at the time, if you were young and newly excited about politics and you wanted to do more than vote and more than volunteer, there was nowhere you could go that would answer your call. So along with my co-founder, an operative named Ross Morales-Raqueto, we wrote a plan and we built a website. And we launched Run for Something on Trump's first inauguration day, thinking it would be really small. We'd get 100 people who wanted to run in the first year. We had 1,000 people sign up in the first week. As of today, we're up to more than 210,000 young people all across the country who've raised their hands to say they want to run. And Run for Something has helped elect more than 1,500 of them to city, county, and state offices all across the country. We've got winners in 49 states. And we have built what I think is the biggest and best program getting young people into elected office. So that vantage point has really given me a lot of perspective on how leadership looks, especially among folks 40 and under.
So if you're paying attention, Amanda is a badass, but she would never tell you that straight to your face. I remember around that election time period, I reached out to our mutual friend, Danielle Butterfield, who I have to shout out because she's one of my favorite people. And I was like, yo, DB, it is bleak out here for the young people. What do we do? And she actually sent me the Run for Something stuff. And so I've been actually a subscriber for almost 10 years now, and kind of keeping an eye on the amazing things you're doing with Run for Something because I love political activism. I love civic engagement. But so much of your work has been in that political activism space and preparing people to lead. And I think that that's more of the undercurrent around some of the work that you've done is preparing people to lead in spaces that have predominantly not been for young people to be or designed to engage young people. Was there a particular moment over the last few years you've been doing this or a pattern that you saw and you said, we need to think about leadership differently? And did that have any spark for your new book?
I think there's a couple moments. The first was my own personal experience. When I started Run for Something, I was 26, about to turn 27 years old. I was single. I had only ever done campaign life, which was meant like 100-hour work weeks, around the clock work. And I knew that I didn't want Run for Something to be that way. So over the 8 years that my partner and I have been building the organization, we tried to lead differently. We did things like pay people really well, really good benefits, aggressive transparency, showing our work in public. In 2022, we implemented a 4-day work week, which is amazing. And then in November 2022, I had my first daughter. I got married at some point a year before. And when I was trying to prepare to go on maternity leave, I started Googling how to take maternity leave as boss. I found a lot of how to ask your boss for maternity leave. And then a bunch of peers and women online being like, no, take the leave. You got to take the leave. It's really important. And I kept coming back to them. No, I want to. Tell me how. Like, how do I hand off the projects that when you are the boss are so big and so all-encompassing and often hard to define? Like what a day in my life looks like. How do I hand that off? And that there wasn't a guide on how to do that felt to me like emblematic of the fact that there weren't a ton of leaders who had been in my shoes before. Now, when I came back from maternity leave, this was spring 2023, I started hearing from a bunch of reporters, political reporters in particular, about the Run for Something alum that were in the news at the time. This included people like Mallory McMorrow, a state senator in Michigan who went viral for a speech against a Republican opponent who'd been calling her a groomer, and Zoe Zephyr, a young trans state lawmaker in Montana who was pushing back against the anti-trans legislation. And the Justins, Justin Pearson, Justin Jones, who were, along with another state rep, expelled from the Tennessee state legislature for pushing back against a gun bill. And the reporters kept asking me, like, what do these leaders have in common? Like, these are all younger, like, what's going on here? And it was a realization that the thing that they all shared was a sense that the way things were done yesterday does not have to dictate the way things are going to be done today or tomorrow. They shared a deep distrust of these institutions. They shared a deep interest in showing up as themselves, mostly as leaders. And I think that's part of the like nuance here is they have boundaries, and of being willing to push back on the way that structures have been built that were not meant for people like them. So that got me to the point of thinking about how to put all of this in pen to paper, how to tell the story of what it meant to be a younger leader who was making things different, who was doing things differently, which is how I got to the book, which is called When We're in Charge. And it is what I think is a first of its kind guidebook for millennials and Gen Z leaders who treat us seriously, not as like nuisances to manage around, but as people showing up in our own right and taking power in a different way.
One, I got to shout out the Justins of Tennessee. I was at the Capitol that day. Woo, what a time. But the Justins lead in a space of what I think is like actual millennial leadership of empathy. And I'm sure you're going to tell us all about it. But I actually got to meet very briefly Justin Jones on a plane. And he was the nicest person. And I was just like, thank you so much for everything you do. And he was like, what are you doing on this flight to Phoenix? And I said, what are you doing on this flight to Phoenix, neighbor? So I think that is, I'm excited to see people like that and other millennials and Gen Z continue in leadership, regardless of where they fall on the aisle, right? Like it's just a different flavor of leadership. But I do want to commend you because I don't know if you're patting yourself on the back enough of that you've taken two experiences that for you personally that were probably tough in 2016, launching something that's going to support your peers, and then your experience with maternity leave, how to do it, how to be a leader through it that didn't exist. And you turned it into something that other people can use. And a lot of people would say, this was hard, woe is me. And maybe you did have a moment like that, but you did channel that energy into something that's going to create greater good. So I hope that you sleep well at night knowing that.
Thank you. I do not sleep that well, but that's because I have two little kids under 2.5. So I appreciate that. It's very
In your quick moments of rest, I do hope that you fall asleep in gratitude of yourself. So we've started to get into it, and you spent a lot of time studying leaders within the Millennial and Gen Z category. As we know, I love a generational moment. How, from your perspective, would you define what effective leadership is like for Millennials and Gen Z? And especially when we think about the workplace and leadership environments that are shifting around us, what feels like all the time.
So for the book, I ended up talking to more than 130 millennial and Gen Z leaders across a variety of different sectors, faith leaders, members of Congress, doctors, lawyers, teachers, business executives, the whole range. And it was really interesting, some of the themes that I heard in those conversations of people wanting to be themselves, but also not wanting to give everything about themselves away to folks who hadn't earned that vulnerability. And understanding that when you are in charge of another person's, especially economic livelihood, you have to keep some distance. There has to be boundaries there. I heard a lot of people talk about the desire for transparency and the tension that comes in with that when actually not everyone can handle the amount of information that we want to actually give them, which is hard. A lot of people talked about the internet, about social media, and about how to perform online, how to tell your story online. So many personal branding guides that I've found online for executives assume that I haven't been on Facebook since I was 15 or that I haven't had an email address since I was 6. It is a deep misunderstanding of how we've shaped our online personas. The flip to that is that, especially for millennials and Gen Z, we intuitively understand how to use these places and these spaces. We've never necessarily had to think about it intentionally in the same way, but intuitively, it makes sense to us how to use these platforms. A lot of folks talked about how lonely leadership is. And I don't think this is exclusive to millennials and Gen Z, but I do think that remote work environments and hybrid work environments, combined with taking positions of power where you cannot be your employees' friends. And I think many of the folks named that, we are not family, we are not friends. We are in a very particular type of relationship that has complicated power dynamics, and I don't want to mess with those. That it can be really isolating. I think the final thing that really sets millennial and Gen Z leadership apart is a desire to not make it your whole life. You want to work hard, you want to get the job done, but you do not want your job to be all of who you are, because your job, as we have now seen from the last many, economic crashes, the pandemic, all of it, that it is not a reliable source of anything. Your job cannot be all of who you are. And how do you lead in such a way that that is possible while still getting the things done in the way you want them to get done?
I could nerd out about so much that you just shared from a leadership theory perspective, but I do think for a long time, we've had this mindset of what we call great man leadership, that you are Superman or Superwoman all the time. That is your only identity. That's the only aspect of who you are. And that's just, as you're kind of pointing out, that's not feasible. At the end of the day, you need to go home and take care of your young children, and you're not going to be the same person you are 24/7 at work, at home, at your hobbies, at 9 a.m. in the morning versus 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So I think that where we're seeing, at least I'm seeing this, is younger generations are understanding there's multiple facets to our identity. Our job is not our full identity. And so it's okay to be shifting in the mindset in the different environments that we're in, and the boundary that exists that we as the individual have to actually protect, to say I'm not actually on the clock right now, so I don't have to put the best face forward.
And how to square that with the desire both on behalf of the leader and on the team of authentic leadership. It does not mean that you are not being yourself when you are being your work self or your best self. It is how to, like, I call it in the book, responsible authenticity, how to be the version of yourself that your team needs. Because I think this is something that people lose sight of a lot as leaders. It's not about us. It's about our teams, about our goals, and it's what they need, and how to navigate the tension that comes in with that. When you are also being not fitting a mold that traditional leadership looks like. I think, when I was writing the book, my editor kept coming back to me. She's like, you talk about how hard it is over and over again, how like wrought with complication it is. And like, that's the point. And I think so many leaders feel like they are failing or pushing a rock uphill because they feel like they can't do it right. I think that is the freedom that we're in this moment, is that what right is does not look like what right was 5 or 10 years ago.
I think, again, you and I just align so much mentally. It's always good to spend time with people like that. I've been talking a lot about, because people are asking like, how do different generations lead? And I'm like, well, the through point is like what an effective leader actually is, or an effective manager. We've been talking a lot about in the workplace environment is, you're actually the offensive line to your team. You have a team full of quarterbacks, and the offensive line, if you follow football, it's literally their job to just block and tackle, so that their team can score. And that's not sexy. Like, that's, people forget that, like, that's actually one of the harder parts of being a leader or manager, is that sometimes you have to go to bat, or you got to take the hit sometimes, or you actually have to remove an obstacle for people on your team to effectively do what they need to do.
You got to eat the shit sandwich. And sometimes it's not.
Yep. That's exactly right. So let's talk a little bit. You don't shy away from calling out what you would consider bad boomer leadership. Normally, I don't authorize generational slander. However, let's talk about where we might see that there's some inefficiencies in bad boomer leadership, and how younger leaders are trying to break that cycle.
Yeah, I think there's a few different places this shows up. One is sort of what I would call the two different ends of like the boomer presence in the office. One is the beep bop robot, only work, no fun, no play boss, for whom it is, you must work around the clock, you must execute, you must be an automatron. The other end is the overshare on Facebook. Your great aunt who posts everything about how, she has IBS and her stepdaughter's nose ring is infected and I couldn't do this, couldn't do that. Like the person who makes their problems, their personal problems, your problem in the workplace. And the goal, I think, for Millennial and Gen Z leaders is to be somewhere in the middle, is to be a little bit more human than the robot and a little bit less of an overshare than the great aunt on Facebook. The other place that I think it shows up quite a bit, and we're seeing this in the political space a ton right now, is when your identity is everything, you don't want to give it up. Or when your job is your whole identity, you don't want to give it up, which really makes it hard to pass the baton. And part of generational leadership, in particular for millennials and Gen Z, is creating things that can exist beyond us. And that means creating systems that are sustainable and scalable. That means creating resiliency within the workplace. That means making sure that, like, on the plus side, if you won the lottery, and on the downside, if you got hit by a bus, if you had to leave your job tomorrow in an emergency, could it move on beyond you? Maybe some things would get dropped, but could it move on beyond you? It's about removing ego and building something beyond yourself.
Thank you for saying that. My first thing was, there's a lot of ego that we have in our work, and a lot of like personal pride that like we have to be the person that pushes the button to feel fulfilled at the end of the day. And I do love that younger generations are like, somebody else can push the button. I'm finding fulfillment in other places. And without naming names, this idea of there's certain politicians where I'm like, how do you have the energy to keep doing this job at your age? God bless you. But like, there's young people that are just teeming with energy, have similar ideas. What if you went and had a nice vacation? And maybe have some therapy along the way. But I think that you're absolutely right, that there is a generational dynamic where there's older generations where their work is their identity. And that's all. It's not saying that's all they have, but that's what they were conditioned to believe, that what our life was supposed to be.
Yeah. It's like when you ask a little kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? You assume the answer is going to be an occupation. And I think, millennials and Gen Z are more and more pushing back on that idea, that actually my life can be more than my work, because my work is not going to love me back. And that doesn't necessarily mean a family or partners or friends, but like, what could it mean to have a life bigger than your job while still being really good at your job?
And I think that when we think about the people that are like some of the most beloved public figures, show us a multitude of their life. Like one of my favorite celebrities of all time is Dolly Parton.
Mm-hmm.
But she cracks me up. She'll be like, "Oh yeah, I'm Dolly Parton, the book lady," and I'm like, "Ma'am, what about all them Grammys? What about all them awards? What about those 1 million albums you've like released?" That's not her full identity. And so there's like she, I think, is so beloved because she shows us the humanity of who she is. And we should put her on every pedestal humanly possible. My Tennessee is showing. But I think about the public figures that are more like that, where their job isn't their only identity, that we buy into them more and we want to follow them. Um, and I think it also allows them to take the step back and be like, I have more going on in my life than my work.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad that we're calling that out. I do think that's a message that many younger leaders want to hear, that it's okay to be a person away from your work and that your work is not your totality. And I think we're seeing that especially loudly with Gen Z,
Mm-hmm.
who's looking at this desire for like a balance in life that is applicable to work and whatever's going on beyond it. What are some of the most realistic strategies that you've seen for young leaders that are trying to hold on to work-life balance, but engaging in, let's just say, like high levels of leadership at a young age?
If you have the power to implement a 4-day work week, think about the like literal structural things you can do to the schedule to give you your time and autonomy back. I think more industries than you might think upon first glance can consider a 4-day work week. Um, and even if it's not exactly like Monday through Thursday, 32 hours a week, think about how you can free yourself from the constraints of the 40-hour 9 to 5 that's older than the boomers themselves. Because in most circumstances, it's probably not serving you anymore. So that's the first one, time. The second big strategy that I've seen is thinking about uh, operating from a place of abundance, to which I mean, how can you staff your team, structure your team, think about projects and deliverables in such a way that you can allow people to have freedom to do their best work? So, does it really need to be done in 2 weeks? Or if people were working a little bit fewer hours, could it get done in 3 and still be just as good? Like being really expansive about what success looks like. The third thing I think is creating really explicit norms of communication within your team, which feels like a very small, like HRE process thing. But in order to create a space that is inclusive and welcoming, in order to create a space that is diverse, which I believe is not a dirty word and is also a practical necessity and a business imperative in almost every circumstance, you need to make sure that you have made the implicit explicit. You need to be very clear about what it means to not be an asshole. I remember talking with folks who were like, well, my communication, like our code of conduct says like, don't be shitty. It's like, what does shitty mean? Tell me what it means. What does it look like when that behavior is performed? And what does it look like when it is not? And then how do you penalize folks or hold people accountable when they cross the line? Write it all down, codify it, socialize it, onboard it, re-onboard it. The same way that you might want to run a subreddit or like a Discord about a fandom, run your community, your hybrid or remote workplace, because those are basically the same thing. It is a community space with very clear communication norms. The more you can make it explicit, the more people know how to behave, and knowing how to behave frees them of the anxiety that they're going to do it wrong on accident.
I cannot shout this from a mountaintop even further. I use that exact concept in my sessions when I'm working with like leading across generations, that it's the responsibility of the leader, regardless what generation they're in, to implement and role model what I call a communications agreement. So early on in working, we talk about like, actually write it down. Like we use this platform for this, we use this platform for this.
Mm-hmm.
Do not use this platform for this. And people are like, but isn't that, I was like, assumed? Isn't, we know that we all know that old phrase of like, if you assume what it makes a you and a me, right? Like, and so they're like, but I shouldn't have to. I'm like, but you should. You should. And I love that you said make the implicit explicit, because it takes the anxiety out of things. And it shows people that you are willing to lean into the thing that they might have been worried about asking.
And like, it is such a relief to know that there are rules that you can follow.
Mm-hmm.
You know how to behave. Think about like when you get an invitation to a party. It is so nice when they're like, arrival time start at 6, dinner will start at 6:30, cocktails will be like, dessert will be around 8:30. here's the dress code, here's what to expect. Like, it is such a relief. And it can feel like too much or like over communicating, but it's not. Not
Yeah.
to say that running a company or running a team is like training a dog or dealing with a toddler. There's a lot of things in common, which is both dogs, toddlers, and teams get very stressed by not knowing what to expect. The
Hmm.
more that we can make sure that people expectations meet reality, the more we can take away from that discomfort and that anxiety.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you've read Priya Parker's like The Art of
Mhm.
Gathering, but what I love, and I apply this to every meeting that I have, like even if it's just with one other person, is setting the context and the expectation of that meeting. And at my old job, I used to decline meeting invites as a
Mhm.
training tool with people that did not include an agenda, did not tell me why we were meeting, did not tell me the goals of the meeting, and did not stick to their time frame. It took
Mhm.
about 2 months, but people were like, we got it. We know that we need to go into it and prepare people to succeed in this setting, even if it's 2 or 3 people gathering to talk about a brainstorm. What are we brainstorming about? What do I need to do before that? Like, what do you hope to achieve in this? And it expedites so much. And so I do love the framing of like the expectation setting is so necessary because it's going to help the people that are like, it's an inclusive measure that's going to help the people that are super anxious about their jobs, which is a lot of people, but it's
Mhm.
also going to help the people that are not anxious enough about their jobs to focus. And then everyone in the middle is well taken care of to some degree. And so if you need affirmation that I love this idea, I think it's amazing. And I think more people need to do it.
And I think it also it solves for some of the conflict that I think, especially a lot of younger leaders are dealing with now, in part because the people we're managing are Gen Zs and millennials who
Mm-hmm.
also want more out of work necessarily than it can always provide, is that you know what you're opting into. You know
Mm-hmm.
what the expectations are. You know what you're going to get out of it. And that can be so helpful and clarifying. I talked with so many leaders who would name like, my employees just want more than I can give. And I'm like, well, have you ever told them exactly what you can and cannot give? Have you
Mm-hmm.
put it in writing? Have you made it clear? At the very least, if those expectations are set up front, then they can opt out.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
always an opt in or opt out experience.
Yep.
That
Yeah.
is such an important part of this.
Yeah.
And making sure that people know what is the space that they are entering and what can they expect out of it. Then at the very least, when you have conflict, you have the rules you can rely on.
Yes, I do a lot of work with people that get frustrated about their younger employees because their expectations aren't being met, but then the expectations were never really clarified. And so then they're in this space where, like, the leader who hired them is like, but I thought this was pretty clear that this would be expected of you. But then the person that is being hired and then they get into that job and it's not, and neither of the, like, the younger person doesn't want to leave, the older person doesn't want to fire them because obviously someone wants a job and someone needs a job done, but they're having conflict because they're not talking about the thing that needed to be talked about. And so I'm like, you just need to be overly communicative about the expectations of the job and do not leave anything into interpretation. That's on, and that is my opinion, is on the role of the leader to do.
100% the onus is on leadership to set the guardrails, to be clear about defining things, to manage expectations. And this is what makes leadership so hard, is because
Mm-hmm.
you've got to do all the upfront work. But I think that is uh, when you do it, it makes everything else easier. And like I write
Absolutely.
in the book about like the moments that I have messed up, the moments that I have failed to do that, I always regret it.
Mm-hmm.
Always regret it. Like cutting corners on the front end, you don't save much time.
Yeah. I continually, when I was leading a team, I used to say, like, you have to prepare others to succeed for the whole team to succeed.
That's right.
And it's the job of leading some other people. So, but I know that there might be some listeners, Amanda, that are not in formal leadership roles. I think sometimes we look at it's the title, like I'm someone's manager, supervisor, uh, volunteer leader, whatever it looks like. Some people might not assume that formal role, but um, they might want to one day and they might not be sure where to start. What's the first move that you'd recommend for, let's just say, our under 40 leaders, our younger leaders, and how they can build confidence and credibility, and still be led by older leaders? I think right here it's like the role-less leader experiences and how people can grow into that so they're prepared when they do have the role.
And I think starting to behave now the way you would when you're in charge is a really good way to build the muscle. So, thinking about how you can very clearly articulate what success and failure looks like, even to yourself and to your boss. Part of managing up, especially if you're not yet in a leadership role, is telling your own story, perpetually telling your story to your leaders or to your leadership, your supervisor, whatever they might be. that practice and that muscle will make you better when you're in a position of power. Thinking really intentionally about how you show up, especially online. I will say this is something I've heard quite a bit from the leaders I spoke to for the book. They'd be like, do my employees realize I can see what they're posting? That I'm like I'm not their grandma. Like I know how to use the internet. And even if I don't follow them, I see it sometimes. It makes their way into my feed. When they're shit talking their work online, like I'm not going to fire them, but I'm also not going to think well of them. Thinking really carefully about how you're telling your story in all spaces and not leaving any of it up to chance. I think like this is one of the things I come back to in the book a lot. There's no right or wrong way to do this. There's only haphazard or intentional. You want to be intentional. That doesn't mean inauthentic. That just means intentional.
I really appreciate that framing because I think people love a checklist, right? Like they love to be like, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this right. I know millennials love that. And you're giving them the gray space that can sometimes feel ambiguous, but is necessary because it's so simple. It's like, did you think through this and do this with intention? Yes,
Mm-hmm.
no. That's the checklist. That's it. Did you stop and think about this? Yes, no. If no, then we have to accept the consequence either way of what was going on here. And I think that that's so simple. Like, is it intentional?
And like I really push you in the book to think about like, do I know myself? Do I know what my goals are? Do I know what my team needs? Like as you're being intentional, you can be goal oriented. But
Mm-hmm.
the point here is not to perform a version of yourself that isn't true to who you are. It's to be present and be thoughtful and make sure that you're not self-sabotaging.
Mm-hmm.
Give me
Absolutely.
times where I see people post stuff and I'm like, ooh, you did not think beyond 1 second before you put that on the public internet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was
Yeah. This is Beyonce's internet. You got to be careful. You can put whatever you want out there, but
that
at the end
doesn't
of the day,
consequences, you know?
correct, correct. Well, Amanda, there's so much to learn from your book, and I want to get to that in a second. But before we wrap up, I ask every guest, well, we talked about millennials. They're great. We're both millennials. We think we're fantastic. That's just kind of who we are. There's a focus on Gen Z. And I know that you've worked with a lot of Gen Z, and they probably are really thankful that you're their boss. But what's your favorite thing about working with Gen Z?
Um, their audacity.
I love their audacity.
I think it's really refreshing to work with people who are so not jaded by the way that like things are broken and who are willing to call it out. Even if sometimes I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. I find that to be really refreshing. And when I take a step back, I'm almost always really thankful that they were ballsy enough to say something.
Yes.
Um, Even when it can be exhausting, I think it's good. And I try
Yeah.
to like really celebrate people who lift up problems, especially when they come to them with solutions too.
Oh,
But
those are the best. Those are absolutely the best. I agree. I think that audacity I always frame it a little bit differently of like their fresh eyes
yeah.
because not that they don't know what they don't know, but when they're looking at it for the first time, they're like the freshest set of eyes you could ask for to
Mhm.
look at this and be like, does this make sense?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't make sense, then maybe it's on us to figure out how we make it make more sense or how we improve it. And
Mhm.
I've found that most of the time when Gen Z will ask an audacious type thing of someone in an older generation, it's never out of a place of malice. Most of the time, it's genuine curiosity. They just don't like sugarcoat too much, and so it can come across as aggressive. But I like that they're straight to the point. Like that's a personal like there's no decoding with them. It's just kind of like they're asking the question. And I think older generations get a little bit weirded out by the audacity because they're like, who gave you the bravery and the permission to be so forthright in how you feel about this?
I think that is the one of the most like fantastic parts because like nobody gave them the bravery. They came pre-baked. And I love that.
Pre-baked. It's just who they are. Well, Amanda, there is so much we can learn from you. Your new book is out, When We're in Charge. It's a fantastic resource for people to understand the world, but understand how they can lead better. Where can people keep up with your work, get your book? Tell people where they can really stay up to date with all the amazing stuff that you're doing.
You can find me on all the various social media accounts, platforms of either Amanda Litman or Amanda Litm. I have a Substack, amandalitman.substack.com. And the book is When We're in Charge, wherever you get your books. And I think it's good. And I hope people like it and read it and share it with their friends. That's the whole goal.
Yeah, it's getting great reviews already. So there's some big endorsements behind it. So, that always wins me over. We'll be sure to include all that information in the show notes for listeners that want to stay up to date with Amanda's work. Again, I've been a lurker and a supporter of your work for almost 10 years now, which is wild. And it's amazing to see everything that you've built and how you're continuing to help people navigate ambiguous times. Let's just call it that. Amanda, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Megan.
Hi, this is Stacey Harris.
And this is Terry Zipper, and we're the host of the two podcasts under the HR Huddle.
On Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, we uncover the latest trends, truths, and challenges from Sapient Insight Group's groundbreaking research and our analyst insights, serving up everything you need to know about HR tech with no sugarcoating.
And on HR We Have a Problem, we tackle the toughest workplace challenges head on, offering you expert advice and actionable solutions to help HR leaders thrive in today's fast-changing world. Whether you want the scoop on tech or tools to solve people problems, we've got you covered.
Take a listen and subscribe. If you want to become part of our community, we'd love to see you.
What a masterclass in modern leadership. Amanda brought the fire and the thoughtfulness. I hope you're walking away with as many takeaways as I am. Truly, that's what it's like every time I get to connect with Amanda, so I'm glad that I got to share it with you this time. Let's take a minute to recap a few of the most powerful insights from my conversation with Amanda. First, lead with boundaries, not burnout. Amanda reminded us that leadership isn't about giving everything away. It's about showing up intentionally. For Millennial and Gen Z leaders especially, that means setting clear boundaries, practicing what she calls responsible authenticity, and creating space to be a human without compromising your impact. Next, communication isn't an extra, it's essential. One of the most tactical takeaways, make the implicit explicit. Whether you're leading a team, running a meeting, or hosting a community event, clarity around expectations, norms, behavior reduces stress, increases inclusion, and creates trust. Also, legacy is greater than ego. Amanda made a critical point. If your organization or project can't survive without you, it's a vulnerability, not a flex. Today's leadership is about building systems that last beyond our names, and that means developing others, sharing power, and preparing to pass the baton. And let's not forget, leadership without a formal title is real. If you're not in a formal leadership role yet, Amanda encourages you to start by behaving like the leader you want to be. Articulate your goals, manage up, and be intentional about how you show up online and offline. Your actions now can shape the opportunities that will come next. And finally, Gen Z's audacity is a gift. Amanda said it best. Gen Z's unfiltered curiosity and boldness might feel disruptive, but it's exactly the kind of energy we need to question broken systems and imagine better ones. Let's not just tolerate that, let's celebrate that audacity. You can keep up with Amanda's work and leadership insights at amandalitman.com. Follow her on social media at Amanda Litman, or subscribe to her Substack, amandalitman.substack.com. And you can find her book, When We're in Charge, wherever you get your books. I really recommend picking it up. If something in today's episode stuck with you, we would love to hear about it. We are always looking for new timely topics or insightful guests to feature, so if you have a suggestion, feel free to share your thoughts using my form on the website, meganmgrace.com. And a quick favor to ask, please follow, rate, review, and share wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help other people find these conversations and learn with us. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or on Instagram at Meghan M. Grace. And I want to give a big thank you to the Gen Z team behind the scenes who brought this episode to life. This episode was produced by Callie Waters and edited by Leah Kramer. Thank you again for stopping by. Let's continue this conversation, and we'll chat soon.